Hello, everybody. Long time no see. Andrew Destin checking in here with Matt Vensel. We're coming to you guys with our weekly Penguins podcast. I was away for the last week or so down in Bradenton covering spring training, but we have to check in with you guys today because obviously an important day for the Penguins. We're recording this Friday afternoon at the conclusion of the NHL trade deadline. Lots to talk about here. But before we get into any of that, I want to remind you that this podcast is brought to you by Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. There's no better place to get new windows and doors installed in your home than Pella, who can help you save on energy costs year-round. Schedule a free in-home consultation with your local Pella Windows and Doors to find the right product for your home and budget. Give them a call at 866-593-1560 to discuss your project further. Again, that's 866-593-1560 to get started planning in your new windows and doors installation with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. So I'm recording this with Matt, where I'm here in Cranberry at the Lemieux Sports Complex. Matt is on the road ahead of the game in Boston, but we both were listening in to the Kyle Dubas press conference, him talking to the media after the conclusion of the NHL trade deadline, of course, talking about the Jake Guentzel trade. Less so, didn't talk about the Chad Ruhwedel trade. I know people are disappointed, but what were your general takeaways from listening from afar, Matt?
You want me to respond to Kyle Dubas and not the trade? Yeah, I mean, with Dubas, he didn't say much. He admitted he was in a rush to get on a plane to Boston. I'm not knocking him for that. Just in his previous press conferences, he provided a lot more clarity. He kind of had, the sense I got from listening to him was that maybe he didn't accomplish everything that he was hoping to set out to do here, over the course of the week. And maybe that's just setting aside the Jake Guentzel trade and talking about some secondary players there. But he mentioned that, with players with term, it's more difficult to move them right now because of the flat cap. And maybe that's something he'll revisit in the summertime. I read that as something involving Riley Smith. And he also talked about wanting, still talking about getting young players who can come in and play alongside Sidney Crosby is something that he's aiming to do. So, maybe he was close to something that we don't know about, or maybe there wasn't anything there and he'll revisit that in the offseason. I do wonder in terms of that, the Pens could have anywhere between, they could have 0, 1, or 2 first-round draft picks, depending on how some things shake out here at the 2024 draft. I do wonder if Kyle Dubas would trade some of those guys for a young pro, kind of like what we saw Montreal do with Kirby Dach a couple years ago. So that's sort of what I took away from Kyle. But in terms of the grand plan and specifically what led to him moving on from Jake Guentzel, little murky still.
Yeah, definitely my takeaway as well. I mean, he was asked pretty directly about it, and I know we'll get into the nature of the trade more specifically here as we get later in the podcast. But that was a big takeaway for me too, was being asked directly about, the extension efforts with Jake. What exactly did those entail? And the only real takeaway that I got from Kyle was that they approached Jake's, camp at the beginning of the season before the season got underway. And from there, it was pretty murky. And there wasn't exactly much clarity given as to why an extension couldn't have been reached at some point in the season, why that couldn't have been an avenue the Penguins went down. It wasn't as if they were forced to trade Jake. He had made it clear before how he enjoys being in Pittsburgh, this being the only NHL team he's known. So that was certainly a takeaway for me, was that I didn't really come away with many answers about why maybe there was the pressure to move Jake. Obviously, there's a rationale behind it of wanting to get younger, acquiring prospects to surround Crosby, and Malkin and Letang and Carlson now is included as part of that core. But certainly that was something that left me with a lot of questions as well.
Yeah, I mean, he was given the opportunity to say, okay, like we couldn't afford Jake, or negotiations didn't go anywhere, like things along those lines. And maybe he just was being respectful to Jake and his agent because the ship has sailed and, there's no point in revisiting it. Or, maybe it wasn't something where the Penguins ever seriously wanted to keep Jake. I mean, maybe they just kind of got a general sense of what the market might be for him and saw an opportunity after getting Erik Karlsson to maybe use Jake as a means to get younger. We don't know that. I don't believe Jake Guentzel has talked yet since the trade. Maybe when he meets with Carolina media, he'll give his perspective on it. I still think there's a lot to sort out there. I mean, my read on it, I'm not going to act like I'm super plugged into Jake and his camp, but my read just on knowing him from covering this team for 6 years and talking to people who are around him within the team, is obviously he wanted to stay. No one's really disputing that. That was his preference. But I also don't get the sense that he was a guy that was looking to break the bank with the Penguins. Maybe that changes when he gets on the open market. That will possibly change his perspective. But, I think he's the type of guy who wanted to stick around, play with Sid, and win another cup with those guys. And, I think he might have been willing, I wouldn't say a team-friendly deal, but he wouldn't be seeking a player-friendly deal either. So that's my read on it. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll find out if we hear more from either of the two sides in the coming days or the coming months. But, yeah, that's a key point. And, we're probably going to pivot into the return the Penguins got for Jake now. But, people who've defended the trade have been offering the caveat like, okay, he's a rental. What did you expect? But I would push back on that and just saying, they didn't need to trade him. They could have re-signed him and done something else. So that would be my pushback on that when people say, okay, well, what did you expect from the return? Well, they didn't have to trade him. I kind of think the Penguins painted themselves into a corner, or at least maybe they did that by basically signaling to everyone that they're going to move Jake a couple weeks ago.
Right. And it's obviously you have to back it up too, even with, the moves that the Penguins have made over the last couple of years, how that's shaking things up. But as Dubas said today in his press conference, they expect to have around $12 million in cap space heading into the summer. The money was there if they wanted to. It was more a matter of how Dubas wants to construct this roster too. So certainly there's a lot of factors at play there, but we've beaten around it. It's probably good that we get to it now in terms of actually breaking down said trade, which saw Jake Guentzel as well as Ty Smith go to the Carolina Hurricanes in return for Michael Bunting, who took part in today's practice in Cranberry, for 3 prospects as well as 2 conditional picks. I know we'll get into each of these guys individually. Certainly Dubas did here at the press conference, but what's your overall takeaway just based on that return, what the Penguins got? These are certainly not maybe the top prospects the Hurricanes got, but what do you take away from this crop?
Yeah, so to take you behind the scenes of the Post-Gazette's coverage, I had to get up 4 a.m. for a flight to Boston. I wanted to get here ahead of the trade deadline. I handed over the story to Andrew last night, Thursday night around 11 o'clock, and the deal wasn't final. And I happened to wake up at 3 o'clock to go to the bathroom. And I looked at my email because I saw that my phone had went off with a bunch of notifications, and I kind of glanced at the return for Guentzel, and I was like, oh, geez, not bad, but kind of less than what I expected. So I tried to go back to bed for a little bit. Eventually, it's just time to get up and go to the airport. And I start looking closer at some of the details of the trade, like the conditions on the pick, where it's really a second-round pick that can become a first, not a conditional first. Starting to do a little bit more digging into the prospects, like seeing if I missed something by not being so familiar with these guys. And the more I looked into it, the less favorable I thought the deal was. Now, I don't think it's like a complete disaster of a trade by any means. They definitely got a lot of quantity here. I guess the thing I thought was lacking was the quality. No premium prospect, at least according to the experts in that area. And the fact that even if this first-round pick does convey this year, the Hurricanes will have to go to the Cup final for that to happen. It would be late in the 20s, and this is said to be a first round of the draft that kind of, has a little plummet after the top 20 picks. So that's what I thought. Obviously this was one interesting aspect hearing from Dubas today, just his perspective on these players. The sense he gave, I don't know what else he was supposed to say, was, well, we're higher on these guys than in the consensus. I'll let you pronounce their names. I'm not going to give it a try. That's why you make the big bucks. But it seems like the Finnish kid is the one who has the best bet to break through. So to sum it all up, I was underwhelmed, but I'm also open-minded because these are all young players. All it takes is one to hit big, and then it becomes a win for Dubas, but none of them look like a strong bet to do that. And in the background, you hear, I'm at my in-laws, there's a dog fighting a cat. So let me mute that right now.
I was going to say that sounds more exciting than listening to you and I talk about Finnish hockey prospects, but what do I know? I got the pronunciation down. I listened to Dubas say Koivunen about 14 times, so hopefully I did that correct. Apologies if I didn't, but that's exactly the right tone, though, in terms of how I feel about it, and also how Dubas presented it. Not that I'm saying that I agree with him, but just a matter of that Koivunen was the guy that he thinks really highly of, certainly of that prospect pool. Twice highlighted him without being asked directly about him. Given the nature of this, a guy who was playing for Karpat over there in Finland, obviously having some guys who have played there, like Joel Blomqvist as recently as a season ago. I think that was part of this too, was there was a degree of familiarity there. And Kyle mentioned how this is a guy, Koivunen, that they had back to his time in Toronto when he was still running the show with the Maple Leafs in 2021. This was a guy that got on their radar. So I think if there's anything that Penguins fans can be a little bit more at ease about this, it's that this is a guy that they've done their homework on. They followed. It's not as if this was a throw-in. It was anything but that. I think that would be, at this point, probably fair to say that that's the headliner of the trade. And Bunting would be certainly another guy, just being an NHL-ready guy who's already been in the league for a handful of years, a couple with Arizona, a couple with Toronto. So, I was a little bit underwhelmed by the deal. But like you said, I mean, there's the potential there. It's young guys. You're increasing the number of needles in the haystack. Maybe one of them hits. The only question that I have about it, and this was a takeaway that I had, was Kyle brought up that, they needed to improve draft capital. They needed to improve the prospect pool to make them a little bit more flexible to make kind of more moves this summer and moving forward. So my takeaway from it was not necessarily that any of these three guys are expected to be impact guys next year or that they need to be in order to maximize the current window with the core, but more so that you've gained capital, guys who you can then potentially move next trade deadline or during the summer to try and make the current team a little bit more competitive. Is that a way to read this trade as well? Or is that, these are guys that you think that they're going to try to stick to for a couple of years?
Well, I mean, no, I think that's possible. I mean, that's what people always said about, Jim Rutherford and trading first in the past and whether they should keep the picks or not. And it's like, well, if they do pick a player, if they pick a good one, that becomes a valuable trade chip. So we'll see there. I do think, to put kind of things in perspective with these three players, I'm not a prospects expert. I don't, like, in my spare time, sit around and watch like the Liga. But there are people I trust, and you look at their rankings, and I know The Athletic, they do their prospect polls, every team a couple times a year, and none of these guys were top 5 for Carolina. Our friend Chris Peters, who we've chatted with before for various stories, he works for Flow Hockey. Same deal for him. So people will push back on that and say, okay, well, yeah, the reason they're not top 5 prospects in Carolina's pool is because it's such a deep pool. Okay, sure, but The Athletic also had a recent ranking of the top 115 prospects in hockey, not in NHL, and none of these guys made the list. So I don't say that to poo-poo the trade or say that these players aren't going to make it. I have got nothing against these players. I mean, if they make it and prove me wrong, awesome, and be a great story. I'm just trying to put it in perspective of how these players are viewed, potentially around the league, but at least by the people who track this stuff. And then the counter to that is, look at Jake Guentzel. He was a 3rd-round pick. He was someone that was kind of not thought much of by the NHL or a lot of people in the NHL, and then he burst on the scene as a rookie, helped the Pens win the Cup in 2013, and look at him now. So I would say, yeah, I'm overwhelmed by the return they got, but I think we should keep an open mind. I mean, we should keep an open mind about everything in life, right, Andrew? You're a hippie from California. I'm sure you have some perspective on that, but we don't know everything. Just like if someone said this is a great trade, we don't know how it's going to turn out. But you kind of just look at the process and what we know about these players and kind of gauge it. But yeah, all it takes is one of these guys blowing up, and suddenly we're talking about this deal differently in 1, 2, 3, 4 years or whatever it may be.
I mean, first off, that's just the nicest compliment I think you've ever paid me in calling me as much. But in all seriousness, yeah, I mean, I think you got to give this a little bit of time to let it marinate. And I think another important thing just to bring up here, and it's not as if anybody's expecting Michael Bunting to come in and be the next Jake Guentzel, very different players in their own right. But that was one thing that Kyle did mention, was the importance of getting somebody who can be, a top 6 player who can immediately play at the NHL level, that it's not just, hey, we're getting a bunch of prospects and hoping, that they want somebody that they can tangibly fit in. Now, on that note, like I said, Bunting is not necessarily going to be a franchise-altering player. In talking to the media here in Pittsburgh today for the first time, he referred to himself on multiple occasions as a complimentary player. I'm curious, in your observations of watching him in the league, a couple of seasons with Arizona, a couple with Toronto, what do you make of him being the one NHL-ready guy thrown into the trade, and what are your impressions of Bunting just in watching him from afar and maybe a little bit more up close last couple of years when he went to Toronto?
Yeah, I have no quibbles with Bunting being in the trade. I mean, the Penguins were highly likely to add a player of his caliber and his age to make the money work, to also plug the depth chart. I mean, trading a guy like Gensel is it's partially about improving the depth of the team. Bringing in 2, 3 players to fill spots instead of having all the eggs in one basket. But more so, this trade was about the young talent. So Bunting, was never going to be the headliner in the deal. But in terms of his role in the deal, yeah, I think he's a perfectly suitable option. I mean, he has 2 years left on his contract. He's 28. His cap hits, I think, 4.5 million or somewhere around there. He has a couple of 20-goal seasons. Was kind of a late bloomer in the NHL. He has Sue Greyhound's ties, of course. Kyle tends to prefer these guys from the OHL team he used to run. He brought Bunting from Arizona, Toronto, and now he brought him here. So, I think with Bunting, he showed in Toronto that if you put him with some star players, he can produce okay. Similarly to Brian Rust. He's a pretty good forechecker. That is important for the way the Penguins like to play under Mike Sullivan. We're assuming Mike Sullivan's still going to be here next year. We'll see if that's TBD here. And he's also pesky. He has a tendency to get under players' skin, also the official skin, which can work against them sometimes. But they don't have a lot of guys who rub guys the wrong way on the team. So I think the fans who are looking for a little bit of sandpaper and grit, I don't think this guy's going to be dropping the gloves every game, but at least it's somebody who is pesky and kind of like a Hornquist type, not to that degree, but someone who's going to irritate guys on the other team. So that's kind of who Bunting is. And, ideally he would slot in as a middle six winger, but maybe he clicks with Sid right away and they just kind of run with it.
Yeah, sounds like that's going to be, at least in terms of work on the power play. Remains to be seen which line he slots in on, but could get a shot here to work on Crosby's line. They didn't do line rushes today at practice, but I'm sure we'll see soon enough with the back-to-back coming up this weekend, starting, of course, in Boston and then Edmonton. Just to quickly recap, talking about those prospects, Koivunen, it sounds like the plan there is to let him keep playing it out overseas, over in Finland, where he's currently playing with Ponomarev. He's going to go to Wilkes-Barre is the plan as of right now. The one prospect who's probably the closest to being at this NHL level, where he's gotten a couple of games with the Hurricanes. And then with Cruz Lucius, who's currently at University of Wisconsin, the expectation from Kyle Dubas is for him to get at least another year there at Wisconsin. But of course, they'll have those kinds of conversations later. Just one more point I wanted to bring up before we kind of move on with further trade discussions. Last point on the Jake Guentzel chatter was we talked to him and brought up the idea of, did the injury at all perhaps impact his stock? He shot down that kind of notion, saying that wasn't big in conversations. Just wanted to get your perspective on that, Matt, because the consensus that Kyle kept getting at was that this is a rental player. If you look at NHL trade history, that rental players aren't going to yield those high picks, or they're not going to yield the blue chip prospect. Do you think that the injury to Jake had any impact on any of this, or is Kyle right that that's just the nature of these kind of 1 month, 2 month rentals that we see now in the NHL?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say in terms of not getting premium prospects for rentals, I haven't done an exhaustive study to say whether that's true or not, but I do know that there's been some really good prospects that have changed teams. And you figure a guy like Jake Guentzel, even though he plays wing, which is probably the least premium position in the league, he's still a heck of a player and was said to be the best player on the market. So I just thought they would get a guy like that. Or a really good young pro. So I do not think, and I never did think, that the injury would be a problem. I didn't think it would affect his trade value. Now, if the Penguins weren't forthcoming when they initially said 3 to 4 weeks and I'll be back around the trade deadline, and it turned out to be worse than that, sure. But once he got back on the ice on the Western Canada road trip, hey, it's a cat. Wow, our YouTube. Where'd that cat go? People listening. I just got attacked by a cat. Anyways, in terms of, Jake started skating on the Western Canada trip, and once it looked like, okay, like this guy is on track to get back, he's eligible to return March 10th, and it looks like he's going to be ready to play for Carolina then or soon thereafter. So I didn't think it would impact it, and Kyle said it didn't, so I'm not surprised.
Yeah, my takeaways from it as well. And that was probably the best moment in our podcast history. Feel free to disagree with me, listeners, or Matt, but that was thoroughly enjoyable.
Well, the listeners would be like, well, "What is going on?" But the people who watch on YouTube will probably enjoy that cat just giving me a blow by. The cat didn't just go like over me or behind me; it went directly in front of me. And if you've been watching, I've been swatting at it like this because it's rubbing up against. I don't even know this cat's name. It's my in-laws' cat, but it's very fluffy, as you guys saw. Handsome cat.
I thought it was good. I thought it was racing across the keyboard, and I was like, "That's impressive in its own right that you're not like losing connection or your screen's going black or something like that."
Well, that was earlier when I was writing my From the Point column. The cat literally stood on the keyboard and it was like, "Oh, whoa, 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 whoa," and I was like, "All right, geez, this is an issue." I think the cat's name is I think this might be Jasper. There's two cats. They look alike. I can't tell them apart.
Well, as a noted non-cat owner, I can't relate to the activities you're enduring with Jasper, but all the power.
Well, I got a cat. Our family cat, Mr. Kitty, would never. He's very cordial. He's a polite gentleman of a cat. These cats here, they're crazy. What are we talking about next?
All right, talking next.
He's back. The cat is back. Hurry up.
Before we just get into wrapping up, talking a little bit about Jake and the career he's had with the Penguins, wanted to ask you about the other couple minor trades the Penguins made today. Certainly less of interest than trading away Jake Guentzel, but what do you think? First, I'll lead off with Chad Ruhwedel, him hang out after 8 seasons in Pittsburgh. The Penguins get a 4th-round pick from the New York Rangers from him. Was that about what you expected? A better product in return the Penguins got from the Rangers? What do you think of what they got for Chad?
Yeah, that's a hard one to gauge because that draft pick is like in 2088 or something like that. Or isn't it 2027? It's like so far down the road. And, the further out you go, the picks kind of seem a little bit less important in real time. I mean, an asteroid could hit the Earth tomorrow, and what would that pick be? But in terms of getting a 4th round, that's I think that's good for the Penguins, and I also think it speaks to Dubas' confidence that he's going to be here for the long haul. That's taking a long view with that. I know some fans beat up on Chad. I don't really understand it. He's a good pro, a really popular teammate, even though he's a kind of a quiet guy when he deals with us. Hardly makes any money. He always does what's asked of him. He understands his role. It's not his fault that he needed to go in the lineup, but when he did, he played pretty well. So, so good for Chad. He's going to get a chance to compete for the Cup, and I also think it makes sense for the Penguins to just move on from him, get a little something, give more opportunity to maybe John Ludwig or some of the guys they have down in Wilkes. People are clamoring for the young guys there, and they want to see them. And then for the Hellberg deal, same deal. Get something for him. He was on a 1-year deal. He's going to get a chance to be the 3rd or 4th goalie for Florida. And the Pens get a conditional pick and a goalie prospect. I don't know anything about the goalie prospect, but, why not at this point? I think the bigger story is what the Penguins didn't do today, because I thought they would be more active.
Yeah, you beat me to it. I was going to say, no notes on either of the trades other than that Ludwig Weber, if I'm saying that close to right, is 27-year-old goalie, so I don't know if you're getting much with him, but I think the bigger news exactly was that, is that you didn't trade away Riley Smith. You didn't trade away Lars Eller, and Kyle Dubas talked about how it's maybe a little bit more difficult to trade guys with a little bit more term, or that the value didn't quite meet those guys based on what they wanted for guys who had another year remaining on their contract. But even given all that, were you a little surprised that neither Eller, no Smith, no Alex Nedeljkovic, who's on an expiring deal, that none of these guys got traded?
I was definitely surprised because it made sense to look to move Smith and Eller, and to a lesser degree Nedeljkovic. I think Nedeljkovic is a guy I would try to sign if it doesn't get too expensive. But Eller's been great. He's just in his mid-30s and is a guy who you would think could get him something back, but apparently not the case. Smith hasn't been a fit. Turned it on a little bit lately, but he's another guy I would have looked to move to get the cap flexibility in the draft pick. But I'm not going to judge these moves because we don't know what the Penguins were offered. It's hard to say. Maybe they didn't get anything of substance, or maybe it wasn't worth their while. And Kyle just said, you know what? I'm going to try to move these guys in the offseason when there's a little bit more cap flexibility for other teams. So surprised, yes, but I'll hold off judgment because I really don't know what other teams were offering for these guys. But it did make sense to try to move them for the reasons I just laid out.
Yeah, I think the guy that I was maybe more surprised that they hung on to was Riley Smith. Eller feels like a guy that you could perhaps build around more so next year and continue to slot in there as your 3rd-line center. Smith was maybe just a little bit of a surprise because I think there was more interest, at least documented with a few reports out there, of whether that was to go back to Vegas, whether that was to go to New York. Maybe you could have packaged him with Chad for some sort of deal there. But again, like you said, I mean, we're not privy to knowing exactly what kind of deal in return they were going to get for those guys. But Smith was maybe the one I was a little bit more surprised about.
Well, I'd imagine because, Smith has that $5 million cap hit, counts towards next year too. I can't imagine Kyle wanting to retain salary on that. And, that's $5 million is a lot for teams to fit in. You saw some teams say, okay, we're out of the Guentzel sweepstakes. Let's move to other players. But yeah, I could see Kyle just not wanting to retain salary on Smith, and maybe that, kind of limiting the number of suitors just due to the fact that they couldn't fit in his full $5 million cap hit.
For sure. That's going to pretty much wrap up the big takeaways there of the trade discussion. I know we're going to get into kind of wrapping it up with final thoughts about the two main guys who did depart from the Penguins. Obviously, this is only my second year in covering the Penguins. Matt, you've spent a lot more time in covering Jake Guentzel. Pretty much anybody in this building, anybody in the community, it's pretty clear how much Jake Guentzel meant to the Penguins and still means to the Penguins moving forward, despite now being with the Hurricanes. I was curious if you had any thoughts, any stories, any little anecdotes to share about Jake?
Well, Jasper the cat is back. Jasper the cat was here to give me emotional support as I talk about Jake. Look, Jake's a great player. He's, the best homegrown success story for the Penguins in at least the past decade. An undersized third-round pick who was able to become a 40-goal scorer because he's super smart and has a sneaky release, and he's not afraid to go to the net, and he takes a beating and he gets up and he keeps on taking it. So tons of admiration for that guy as a player. It's always cool. I wasn't here for the Cup years. I came right after him, but it's always cool to see younger guys get married, have kids, start families, grow up. And that's exactly what Jake did here in Pittsburgh. And you could tell the impact that he had on his teammates. They were pretty emotional about the fact that he was leaving, and understandably so. So, I think this works out for Jake. I know he wanted to stay. That was his preference, but not a bad consolation prize. He gets to go to one of the, 6 teams, I think, that can win the Cup this year. And then he has a chance to pick a new team and cash in this summer. So, I know ideally he wanted to stay, but this is still a good opportunity for him if he is able to kind of get to the mental state where he embraces it. But yeah, he's a warrior, and he was a great third-round pick, and, going to be big skates to fill for the Penguins there because 40-goal scorers don't grow on trees.
Yeah, absolutely. He was one that was never anything but good to us in our interactions, even just the 2 years being here, and certainly couldn't have put it any better myself. And that sentiment was shared throughout the room. After the game yesterday, Thursday night, again today, guys talking about Jake, Kenny Malkin. He talked a little bit about him. One little tidbit just to throw out there: I was surprised Kenny Malkin highlighting Chad Ruhwedel about him being traded. Highlighted Chad and the value that he had.
Yeah, I would say it was like an even money bet that Gino knew Chad's name. I know Chad's been here for a long time, but Gino has like a reputation for not knowing people's names at all or calling them nicknames. I'm only 25% joking there. But still, yeah, I mean, it does speak to Chad's contributions. I mean, this guy was one of the holdovers from the 17 Cup team as well. I already kind of gave my 2 cents on Chad, but, another guy that, I enjoyed dealing with. And, geez, I mean, how many guys are left from the Cup teams now? 4? Sid, Gino, Letang, and Brian Rust. Time flies, especially when you're not winning playoff series.
Yeah, that's the last 4 remaining, and certainly it's no wonder why that's the case. But that's pretty much going to wrap up our discussion of the trade deadline. Perhaps maybe a little bit more underwhelming than Penguins fans thought it would be, but certainly still Jake Guentzel heads out to Carolina, joining the Hurricanes as part of that big deal on Thursday night. And of course, we'll be back to our regularly scheduled podcasting for the rest of the season, now that I am not occupied with Pirates spring training baseball, much to Matt's pleasure.
Yeah, and if the Penguins continue to struggle, we'll just do more cat videos. It'll be fine.
I can get by that. Hey, you got one waiting at your house, so we'll do that next Monday. Sounds like a plan. All right, thanks so much for tuning in, guys. We will catch you all again next week. We'll leave Matt to his cat, and we will check in soon. See you guys.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.